Christmas Eve. The temperature dropped to -18 as SEAL Team Bravo 6 moved through the snow-covered valley. Lieutenant Derek Briggs glanced at his watch. 2,134 hours. They were 3 hours behind schedule, escorting a convoy of humanitarian supplies through disputed territory. Medical equipment, winter clothing, food rations for villages cut off by the early blizzards. The mission was supposed to be low risk, a public relations operation more than a combat deployment. The intel brief that morning had been routine until the final slide, a grainy satellite image, enhanced thermal signatures, and a code name that had drawn uncomfortable silence from the assembled operators. Ghost of Winter. Intelligence analysts had compiled a file spanning 4 years and 17 confirmed eliminations. All precision shots at extreme range. All in winter conditions, the Ghost operated with surgical efficiency, targeting coalition force multipliers, communication specialists, forward observers, senior non-commissioned officers, people whose loss degraded unit effectiveness without generating headlines. Ghost of Winter. Confirmed kill at 2,100 meters, presumed Kia, 2 years prior. The words had drawn skeptical laughs from the team. A female sniper, supposedly dead, now rumored to be operating in these mountains. Ghost stories, most figured. Propaganda, designed to spook coalition forces. Briggs had dismissed it with the rest of them. Now, as wind howled through the valley and snow obscured their thermal optics, the silence felt wrong, too still, too deliberate. The convoy of 3 Humvees crawled forward, headlights cutting weak paths through the blizzard. Sergeant Marcus Webb keyed his radio. His voice crackled through the static. The lead vehicle was losing traction. They needed to find shelter, regroup, and wait out the storm. Briggs was about to respond when the first shot arrived. Not the crack of a nearby rifle, but the delayed report of something fired from extreme range. The antenna array on the lead Humvee exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Communications died instantly. No radio, no sat phone, no drone support. Then came the calculations in his head. Wind speed, temperature, the angle of the shot. Whoever had fired that round was operating at a distance that exceeded their counter-sniper protocols. This was not a lucky shot. This was surgical precision from someone who understood ballistics at a level most snipers only read about. The 2,100 meters shot SEAL team goes blind. Briggs dropped behind the engine block of the second Humvee, his M4 raised uselessly toward the mountain ridge 2 kilometers away. The team scattered into defensive positions, each man knowing they were exposed in ways their training had not prepared them for. Standard counter-sniper doctrine called for immediate suppression fire and rapid relocation. But suppression was meaningless when you could not identify the threat position. Relocation was suicide when every movement could be observed from above. He ran calculations in his head. The sound delay between impact and report suggested at least 1,800 meters, possibly more. Wind speed was gusting between 15 and 20 knots. Visibility was deteriorating by the minute, and temperature inversions in the valley would affect bullet trajectory in ways that required sophisticated ballistic computers to predict accurately. Someone up there had made that shot without computer assistance, relying purely on experience and instinct. That realization was more frightening than the destroyed communications array. Webb crawled toward the lead vehicle, assessing the damage. The communications array was completely destroyed. Worse, the shot had severed hydraulic lines. Fluid leaked onto the snow, dark and steaming in the cold. A second shot came. This time, it struck the ground 3 feet from Briggs, kicking up frozen dirt and ice. The message was clear. You are in my sights. I could have killed you. Corporal Jason Miller, the youngest member of the team, pressed himself against the Humvee's tire. His breathing came fast and shallow. Briggs recognized the signs of panic beginning to set in. He moved toward Miller, keeping low. The kid was 22, fresh from advanced training. This was his 3rd deployment, but his first time under precision fire from an adversary who seemed to operate beyond the laws of physics. Briggs spoke quietly but firmly. Breathe. Count to 4. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. They needed Miller functional, not frozen with fear. Webb returned from his assessment. The news was grim. They had no way to call for extraction. The storm was intensifying, making aerial support impossible even if they could establish contact. Their best option was to hunker down and survive until morning, when the weather might clear enough for rescue. But morning felt very far away. Briggs scanned the ridgeline through his rifle scope. Nothing. The shooter was invisible, camouflaged perfectly in the snow and darkness. Whoever this ghost of winter was, they possessed patience and discipline that rivaled the best snipers Briggs had ever encountered. A third shot never came. The silence stretched on, more terrifying than gunfire. They were being watched, studied, kept in a state of suspended terror, while an unseen enemy decided their fate. Ambush expands, the enemy starts, closing in. 20 minutes later, movement appeared on the valley's eastern slope. Thermal signatures, faint but unmistakable. 8 hostiles, possibly more, moving in tactical formation down the mountainside. The sniper had been the anvil. Now came the hammer. Briggs realized with sinking certainty that they had driven directly into a kill box. The damaged communications, the disabled vehicle, the approaching ground forces, all of it orchestrated by someone who understood not just marksmanship but combined arms tactics. Webb distributed what little ammunition remained after the long patrol. Each man had perhaps 3 magazines, enough for a brief firefight, not enough for a prolonged engagement against superior numbers. Miller was struggling again. His hands shook as he checked his weapon. Briggs moved closer, placing a hand on the young corporal's shoulder. The gesture seemed to help. Miller's breathing steadied slightly. The hostile forces advanced with professional discipline. They knew the terrain. They knew the SEAL team was trapped. There was no rush, no need for haste. They could take their time, methodically closing the distance until the Americans had nowhere left to run. Snow fell harder now, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. The Humvees provided minimal cover. If the attackers had RPGs or heavy weapons, this would be over quickly. Briggs made calculations. They could attempt to break through on foot, leaving the vehicles and humanitarian supplies behind. But in this weather, at night, in hostile territory, their chances of survival were minimal. They would freeze before reaching friendly lines. Stay and fight was equally grim. Outnumbered, outgunned, with a precision sniper somewhere in the darkness ready to eliminate anyone who broke cover. A sound drew his attention. Faint, metal scraping against metal. It came from beneath the damaged Humvee. Briggs assumed it was equipment shifting, maybe a damaged axle finally giving way. But then he heard it again. Deliberate, purposeful. Something was moving under the vehicle. A hand emerged first. Small, wrapped in white thermal gloves. Then an arm, pushing aside snow that had accumulated beneath the Humvee's chassis. A figure pulled herself out from the vehicle's undercarriage, covered head to toe in winter camouflage that was crusted with ice and hydraulic fluid. Briggs raised his rifle instinctively, but something made him hesitate. The figure moved with practiced efficiency, not the jerky motions of someone trying to escape or attack. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She stood slowly, barely 5'6", but carrying herself with an authority that filled the space around her. She pulled down the white face covering, revealing features weathered by cold and hardship. Her eyes sharp, calculating, utterly calm, swept across the tactical situation in seconds. Lieutenant Aria Hale. Briggs felt his breath catch. He had seen the casualty reports 18 months ago. Lieutenant Hale, former SEAL sniper instructor, missing in action after an operation in these same mountains, presumed killed in action after search efforts yielded nothing but burned equipment and blood in the snow. Yet here she stood, very much alive. She spoke, her voice rough from disuse but steady. 2,100 meters. I know him. Webb moved forward, weapon still raised. He demanded identification. Hale recited her service number without hesitation, followed by operational codes that only someone with her clearance level would know. Briggs lowered his rifle. Questions could wait. The advancing hostiles would not. Hale moved to the rear of the Humvee and pulled away a hidden panel. Inside was a drag bag, military grade, covered in the same white camouflage as her clothing. She unzipped it with practiced motions, revealing a Mark 13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, modified with custom optics and a suppressor. Miller stared, recognition dawning. He had heard the legends during training. Lieutenant Hale, the instructor who could hit targets at impossible ranges, who had trained half the current generation of SEAL snipers before disappearing. Briggs found his voice. How long have you been under there? Hale checked her rifle. Movements, automatic and precise. 3 hours. I hitched a ride when you stopped at the checkpoint. Figured you might end up here eventually. She looked up at Briggs, and he saw something in her expression that explained everything. This was not coincidence. This was deliberate. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the ghost of winter to appear again, waiting for revenge. 18 months earlier, Lieutenant Aria Hale had led a reconnaissance mission into these same mountains. Christmas Eve then, too. The pattern was not lost on her. Her team had been tasked with gathering intelligence on weapons caches, nothing more. They were supposed to be ghosts themselves, invisible and gone before anyone knew they had been there. But someone had known. Someone had been watching. The ambush came on their 3rd day in the field. Her spotter, Sergeant David Chen, died instantly, shot through the scope while scanning a ridgeline. Hale had reacted on instinct, rolling behind cover as a second shot tore through the space where her head had been moments before. 1,700 meters. An impossible shot through, blowing snow and thermal interference. But it had come within inches of ending her life. The rest of her team had been picked off systematically over the next 6 hours, each shot precise, calculated, delivered from a position they could never quite locate. Hale had survived only by crawling into a narrow crevice in the rocks, staying motionless for 14 hours while the shooter waited above. Eventually, the shooter had left. Hale emerged with severe hypothermia and a shattered radio. She had tried to reach friendly lines but collapsed in the snow after 2 miles. She woke in a cave, tended by local shepherds who wanted no part in the war. They kept her alive through the winter, hiding her from both sides. An elderly woman named Fatima had changed her bandages, brought her goat milk and flatbread, asked no questions about the American soldier who had appeared half frozen in the snow. When spring came, Hale made a choice. She could return and face the questions, the debriefings, the doubts about how she had survived when her team had not. She would face accusations of desertion, perhaps even collaboration. The military justice system would grind through her story with skeptical precision. Or she could hunt the one who had killed them. She chose the hunt. For 18 months, she had tracked rumors, monitored radio traffic, studied the patterns of ghost attacks. She learned that the shooter only operated in winter, only in this specific mountain range, only on missions that coincided with significant dates. Christmas Eve had become a signature, a calling card left at multiple kill sites over the years. Hale had known, with absolute certainty, that this Christmas Eve would bring another attack. She had positioned herself accordingly, hiding beneath the Humvee 3 hours before the convoy even departed its forward operating base. The discomfort, the cold, the risk of discovery, all of it was worth the opportunity to face her nemesis one final time. Briggs listened to this abbreviated version of events, understanding dawning. The ghost of winter had not just been an adversary to Hale. The shooter had studied her methods, learned her techniques, and turned them against her own team. Hale finished assembling her rifle. She checked wind speed with a handheld anemometer, atmospheric pressure with a small gauge. Her movements were ritualistic, meditative. This was not about anger. This was about settling accounts. The advancing hostiles were closer now, less than 400 meters away. But Hale's focus remained on the distant ridgeline where the ghost waited and watched. Hale settled into position behind a partially collapsed stone wall, the only solid cover available. She extended the rifle's bipod and adjusted the scope, compensating for temperature, wind, and the Earth's rotation at this latitude. 2,100 meters. The maximum effective range of her rifle under ideal conditions. These conditions were far from ideal. She fired once, deliberately aiming 3 meters off target. The muzzle flash from her suppressor was minimal, but any competent sniper would detect it. She was announcing her presence, letting the ghost know that the game had changed. 10 seconds later, return fire struck the wall 6 inches to her left. The ghost had found her. Hale relocated immediately, moving to a position 15 meters away. This was the dance of counter-sniping. Shoot and move. Never stay static. Force your opponent to constantly recalculate. She fired again, this time aiming closer to where she estimated the ghost was positioned. Another return shot came, this one passing so close she felt the pressure wave against her cheek. The ghost was adapting quickly. Too quickly. Hale realized with cold certainty that her opponent was using her own tactics, the same shoot and freeze method she had pioneered years ago during training rotations. Briggs watched this exchange with growing understanding. This was not just a firefight. This was two masters of their craft engaged in a lethal chess match, each move calculated to force the other into making a mistake. Webb pulled his attention back to the advancing ground forces. They were using the sniper duel as cover, closing the distance while the SEAL team remained pinned down. Briggs made a decision. Webb, Miller, set up claymores along the approach routes. We will hold them here while she works. Miller moved to comply, his fear now channeled into action. Webb positioned anti-personnel mines with practiced efficiency, creating a defensive perimeter that would at least slow the attack. Hale fired again. And again. Each shot precisely calculated, forcing the ghost to respond, to reveal patterns in timing and positioning. She was gathering data, building a mental model of how her opponent thought and reacted. Then she saw it. A deviation in the return fire timing, 0.3 seconds slower than before. The ghost was repositioning after every shot, but the movements followed a predictable pattern. A pattern Hale recognized because she had taught it. The first claymore detonated at 2,247 hours. The explosion lit up the snow, followed by screams from the hostiles who had tripped the wire. But the attack did not stop. If anything, it intensified. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions. The SEAL team returned fire, but their ammunition situation was growing critical. Webb took a round through his left shoulder, the impact spinning him around and dropping him behind the Humvee. Hale heard the commotion but forced herself to maintain focus. She could not help with the ground assault. Her target remained the ghost. If she eliminated the sniper, the attacking forces would lose their overwatch and coordination, but her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Briggs dragged Webb to cover, assessing the wound. Through and through, missing bone. The sergeant would survive if they could stop the bleeding and get him medical attention. If they survived the next 10 minutes, Miller was holding his position, firing controlled bursts at advancing shadows. The kid was performing better under pressure than Briggs had expected. Combat had a way of revealing character. Hale appeared beside them, moving with eerie silence. She had medical supplies from her cache, stuff that had kept her alive through the winter. She worked on Webb's shoulder with efficient movements, packing the wound and applying pressure. While she worked, she spoke rapidly. The hostiles were funneling into a kill zone. If they set charges at two specific points, they could trigger a controlled avalanche that would block the main approach. It would buy them time. Briggs stared at her. An avalanche? In these conditions, that was as likely to kill them as the enemy. Hale met his gaze. Trust me, I have been living in these mountains for 18 months. I know how they move. Something in her voice convinced him. Briggs called Miller over and explained the plan. The corporal looked skeptical but nodded. They positioned the remaining explosive charges at the points Hale indicated, working fast while return fire kicked up snow around them. When the charges detonated, the effect was immediate. A section of the slope above the hostiles gave way, thousands of tons of snow and ice sliding down with thunderous force. The attacking force scattered, losing cohesion and momentum. Hale was already moving back to her sniper position. The avalanche had created a brief window. The ghost would be distracted, reacting to the changed tactical situation. This was her chance. Hale settled behind her rifle for what she knew would be the final exchange. The blizzard had intensified to the point where normal optics were useless. Thermal imaging could not penetrate the wall of falling snow. Laser rangefinders gave erratic readings. Every technological advantage had been stripped away, leaving only the most primitive form of marksmanship, instinct, refined by 10,000 hours of practice. She closed her eyes, letting other senses take over. Wind direction could be felt on exposed skin, the subtle pressure variations indicating shifts in velocity and angle. Temperature gradients created invisible channels through the air, pathways where bullets would drift less or more depending on density. The way sound carried through the valley, bouncing off rock faces and absorbed by snow, created an acoustic map of terrain features. She built a mental image of where the ghost must be positioned, not where logic suggested, but where instinct whispered. There, a shallow depression on the ridge, offering cover from three sides but with a clear line of sight to the valley floor. Natural rock formations would provide overhead protection from counter-battery fire while allowing rapid repositioning. It was where she would have set up. It was where she had taught countless students to set up during training rotations at Fort Benning and Quantico. Hale made microscopic adjustments to her scope, elevation, windage. She factored in the Coriolis effect at this latitude, the drop rate of her specific ammunition, even the minor variations in air density caused by the falling snow. 2,100 meters. An impossible shot in these conditions. But she had made impossible shots before. Her breathing slowed, heartbeat steady. The world contracted to just her, the rifle, and the target she could not see but knew was there. She fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The suppressed report was swallowed by wind and snow. For 3.5 seconds, the bullet traveled through space, fighting gravity and air resistance. Then, through her scope, Hale saw movement on the distant ridge, a figure stumbling, falling. The thermal signature that had been steady for the past hour suddenly shifted, then went still. She had hit the target. No return fire came. The ghost of winter was silent. Briggs watched through his own optics as enemy forces on the valley floor began to falter. Without their overwatch, without the psychological pressure of the legendary sniper covering their advance, their attack lost coordination. Some began to withdraw. Others took defensive positions, unsure of what had just happened. Hale lowered her rifle slowly. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline and cold and relief mixing together. She had carried the weight of her fallen team for 18 months. That weight had not disappeared, but it felt different now, lighter. Miller appeared beside her, eyes wide. Did you actually hit someone at that range? In this weather? Hale did not answer. She was already packing her rifle, preparing for what came next. With the ghost eliminated, the tactical situation shifted dramatically. The SEAL team, reinforced by Hale's presence and expertise, pushed forward aggressively. What had been a desperate defense became a controlled counterattack. Hale directed their movements, using her knowledge of the terrain to identify choke points and ambush positions. She was not just a sniper, she was a tactician who had survived alone in hostile territory by understanding how to think like both hunter and hunted. The remaining hostile forces began a full retreat. Some tried to regroup on the eastern slope, but Hale eliminated 3 of them in rapid succession, her shots precise despite the continuing blizzard. A final threat emerged as dawn approached. One hostile fighter, separated from his unit, appeared with an RPG launcher. He was setting up to target the Humvees, to destroy the vehicles and everything they represented. Hale acquired the target through her scope. 800 meters, downhill angle, strong crosswind. She adjusted and fired. The fighter dropped before he could launch the rocket. Silence returned to the valley. Briggs approached Hale as she secured her rifle. He was exhausted, his uniform torn and stained, but alive. They were all alive, largely because of the woman who had appeared from beneath a Humvee like a ghost returning from the dead. He wanted to say something profound, something that captured the debt they owed her. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you. You saved us all." Hale looked at Webb, who was stable despite his injury, and at Miller, who had proven himself in combat. She looked at the humanitarian supplies still intact in the convoy. Some things were worth fighting for, worth surviving for. The snow was beginning to lighten as the blizzard moved past. In the gray pre-dawn light, Hale could see the ridgeline where the ghost had been, empty now, silent. She thought of Chen, of her team, of the 18 months spent in these mountains preparing for this moment. Justice felt different than she had imagined, less satisfying, more necessary. The rescue helicopters arrived at 0630 hours, the storm finally clearing enough for aerial operations. They came in fast and low, combat medics immediately attending to Webb while the rest of the team secured the perimeter. Hale stood apart from the activity, watching the organized chaos of extraction procedures. She had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a larger machine, to be connected to something beyond survival and vengeance. An officer emerged from the lead helicopter. Colonel Patricia Walsh, Special Operations Command. She had been briefed during the flight in, but nothing had prepared her for actually seeing Lieutenant Aria Hale standing in the snow, very much alive. Walsh had attended the memorial service 18 months ago, had written the letter to Hale's parents explaining that their daughter had died serving her country with distinction. The official file had been closed, the case marked resolved. Now, that file would need to be reopened, countless reports amended, questions answered about chain of custody and operational security. The bureaucratic headache would be substantial. But looking at the young lieutenant standing at attention in torn winter camouflage, Walsh found she did not care about the paperwork. Some stories defied neat categorization. Walsh approached carefully. Hale came to attention, muscle memory from years of service overriding 18 months of isolation. The colonel studied her for a long moment. "Lieutenant Hale, you have been officially listed as killed in action for over a year. We have some questions." Hale nodded. "I understand. I will answer what I can." Walsh glanced at Briggs, who had provided a preliminary report. "Your actions tonight saved the lives of 7 American service members and protected critical humanitarian supplies. Whatever happened during your time missing, you have more than proven your continued value to this command." She paused, then added, "Your service record will be updated. You will be reinstated with full honors and back pay. But first, you need medical attention and debriefing." Hale hesitated. "The ghost of winter. We need to confirm the elimination." Walsh shook her head. "That is no longer your concern. You have done enough. Let someone else finish this." But Hale knew better. In this line of work, you never assumed the target was down until you had visual confirmation. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Miller appeared, supporting Webb as medics prepared him for transport. The sergeant managed a weak thumbs up. Hale returned the gesture. Briggs walked over to where Hale stood beside the damaged Humvee. He carried something wrapped in cloth. When he unwound it, she saw her spent brass casings from the night's engagement. He had collected them from the snow. "Evidence," he said simply. "Or maybe souvenirs. Either way, I figured you might want them." Hale took them, feeling the cold metal through her gloves. Each casing represented a moment, a decision, a life saved or taken. The weight of command had never been clearer. The sun was rising now, light breaking through the clouds and illuminating the valley in shades of gold and white. Christmas morning. Hale had survived 2 of them in these mountains now. She hoped there would not be a third. As the helicopters prepared for departure, Hale took one last look at the ridgeline. Somewhere up there, in the snow and rocks, lay the answer to 18 months of questions. The identity of the ghost of winter. Whether it had been one person or many, whether this really was over. She climbed aboard the helicopter, accepting the offered headset and blanket. The crew chief secured the door, and the aircraft lifted off, banking away from the valley. Below, the convoy sat abandoned in the snow. The humanitarian supplies would be recovered later, once the area was fully secured. The damaged Humvee that had sheltered her for 3 hours looked small from this altitude, insignificant. But it had been enough. Enough cover to wait. Enough concealment to survive. Enough of a shield to protect what mattered. Walsh spoke through the headset. "When we land, there will be reporters. The story of your survival is going to draw attention. Are you prepared for that?" Hale considered the question. She had spent 18 months invisible, a ghost among ghosts. Returning to the world of light and accountability would require adjustment. But she had always known this moment would come. The only question had been whether she would return as a victor or a casualty. Looking at Briggs and Miller and Webb, at the men she had helped save, Hale knew the answer. She had returned as both, victorious in the immediate sense, but carrying casualties that would never fully heal. As the helicopter flew toward friendly lines, Hale reached into her pocket and pulled out a single spent casing, not from tonight, but from 18 months ago. She had carried it through the entire winter, a reminder of what had been lost and what remained to be settled. The brass was tarnished now, darkened by time and exposure to the elements. On it, she had scratched 5 initials with the tip of a knife. Her team, her responsibility, her failure to protect them. She placed it carefully on the floor of the helicopter, letting it roll with the aircraft's motion. A small ceremony, witnessed by no one but carrying weight nonetheless. Sergeant David Chen, her spotter, who had taught her to read wind patterns by watching how birds flew. Corporal Jennifer Martinez, the communications specialist who could fix any radio with improvised parts. Staff Sergeant Raymond Cooper, 22 years of service, 2 months from retirement. Lieutenant James Park, fresh from officer training, eager to prove himself. Private First Class Tyler Davidson, 19 years old, who carried pictures of his daughter and talked about becoming a teacher after his enlistment ended. 5 names, 5 lives, 5 reasons she had spent 18 months preparing for this night. The ghost of winter had taken them from the world, but Hale had ensured that debt was paid. Not revenge. Exactly. Justice felt like too grand a word. This was simply balance. The scales made even through precision and patience. No more ghosts on Christmas. The words felt right. Not a promise she could keep, necessarily, but a commitment to try. The helicopter banked east, toward the rising sun, leaving the valley and its shadows behind. Below, the snow continued to fall, covering tracks in blood and spent brass, erasing the evidence of the night's violence. But memory would remain. For Hale, for Briggs, for all of them who had stood together in that frozen valley on Christmas Eve. Some battles ended. Some simply paused, waiting for the next winter, the next mission, the next moment when training and luck and determination would be tested once again. The mountains would still be there, indifferent to human conflict. Snow would fall every December, covering old battlefields and creating new ones. Lieutenant Aria Hale was ready for whatever came next. She had proven that much to herself, to her fallen team, to the chain of command that had written her off as dead, and perhaps that was the only victory that truly mattered.